This video covers Chapter 1, pages 10 through 15, and pages 21 through 33 of our textbook. It's really an introduction to relational databases in SQL, and I expect this is really a review for hopefully all of you. At the end of this lecture, you should be able to describe the way a database is organized using these terms, essentially a review of how databases are organized, and understand the relationships between different tables, primary keys, foreign keys, understand different data types, understand the difference between DML and DDL, and understand some of the coding techniques you can use to make your SQL code easier to read and maintain. So if we look at a table within a relational database, we see we have columns and we have rows, and we also have a primary key. A primary key in a table uniquely identifies each record within that table. Another word for columns is attributes or fields. Other words for rows is records or tuples. So you should be familiar with these terms: relational database, table, column, row, cell, primary key, composite primary key, non-primary key, and index. And typically, the relationship between multiple tables is between a primary key and the foreign key of the table. So in this case, we have an invoice table and a vendor table, and the primary key in the vendor table is the vendor ID, and it's a foreign key in the invoices table. And that's how we relate these two tables together. Typically, the relationship when you join the tables is between a primary key and a foreign key. So you should remember these terms, particularly from the database theory course: foreign key one-to-many relationship, one-to-one relationship, and many-to-many relationship. Essentially, there are only three relationships between tables. These three: one-to-one, one-to-many, and many-to-many. One-to-many is the most common. The data type determines the type and size of the information that can be stored in the column. Each column definition also indicates whether or not it can contain null values. A null value indicates that the value of the column is unknown. A column can also be defined with a default value. Then that value is used if another value is not provided when a row is added to the table. A column can also be defined as an identity column. An identity column is a numeric column whose value is generated automatically when a row is added to the table. So these are a few of the typical data types that are available in SQL Server. There are a lot more available. You don't have to memorize these, but just be aware of the typical categories. You've got alphanumeric or character-based. You've got numeric, and you have date fields. And I have a link to a video here that covers these also. So the columns of a table have properties. The data type that's assigned to a column determines the type and size of the information that can be stored in the column. If a column can contain null values. Default values, we already talked about this. SQL programmers typically work with DML statements, or data manipulation language statements, while database administrators, or DBAs, work with DDL statements, or data definition language statements. So if you're creating or changing the structure of a database, then you're using DDL. If you're querying or changing the data of a database, then you're using DML. So this is a statement that creates a database. So this DDL statement, create database AP, and then create table invoices with all the different fields and all the attributes of the fields. This is a DDL statement, the first one, alter table, that changes the or adds a column to the table. The second one drops a column of a table. And the third one creates an index of a table. All of these are DDL statements. We have an invoices base table in the AP database that we'll be loading. And this is all review, select, from, where, order by. These should be second nature to you by now. And then if all the data that you want is not contained in one table, then you need to join tables together. And you can join more than two. You can join any number of tables together. And again, typically you're joining on the primary key and the foreign key. So when you join tables together, you're essentially adding columns to your result set. So some columns may be coming from one table, other columns may be coming from another table. A base table is the table that's stored in the database. A result set is the result of a query. And you should know about calculated values and queries, joins, inner joins, and outer joins. And we'll get some practice with those in the homework assignments in the following couple of weeks. If we want to change the data, here we're inserting data into the invoices table. This is a DML, or a data manipulation language function. If we want to change the value of the data, then again we have these update commands or DML statements. And we didn't really do much with these updates in our SQL Fundamentals class, but we're going to learn how to do these in our class PROG140. And here we're deleting data from database. Again, these are DML statements. So this just gives you some examples of things you should think about when you're writing your code. There are no hard, fast rules on how you should format your statements, but some general guidelines are that you should maybe change the case. So here we've got uppercase select and put on another line the from and the where. So each of the main commands or clauses are on separate lines. So just make it easier to read is actually the best guidance you can have. And page 33 of the book has some coding recommendations on how to make it easier. You can make comments in your code. Keep in mind that if you over-comment in your code, you're probably making it harder to read. So you want to make your code easy to read, but you don't want it to do that just because you commented excessively in your code. So but when you do comments, like who wrote the code, when you wrote it, you have the option of using a block statement, which is the /* and then you have your comments, and then you end it with a star and a /. Or if you just want to use a one-line comment, you use the double dash or 2 hyphens. So here's some coding recommendations. Again, these are just recommendations, but you should try and make your code readable. Spend a little bit of time. Make sure that it's formatted in an easy-to-read format so that when you have to look at it next time or somebody else has to look at it, it's easy for them to pick up. So start each new clause on a new line. Break long clauses into multiple lines and indent continued lines. Capitalize the first letter of each keyword. I like to capitalize the whole letters of each keyword. End each statement with a semicolon, and use comments only for portions of code that are difficult to understand. Okay, that's it for Chapter 1.